Michael Steele is the former chairman of the RNC, and he was elected chairman of the RNC on January 30th, 2009. As chairman, Mr. Steele set a new direction for the Republican Party, actively engaging Americans in their local communities and empowering state and local Republican organizations to do the same. So please welcome Mr. Steele.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. Oh, come on. I got up early too. It is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Ed. And I wanted to take a few moments because you guys are very serious into the business of providing a very important need to a lot of folks out there, particularly those who are poor, those who are often left outside the system, bringing them in and getting them the resources that they need. And I thought this morning's conversation would be just that, a conversation. So I do want to carve out some time at the end of my thoughts for you to ask questions. So there's a mic there. Please don't be shy. There's no question that's too hard. A lot of them that may be a little too easy. But I really would like you to participate with me this morning. And the thinking is to sort of set the backdrop for your conference as you begin, so that we all understand while you're here doing the very important heavy lifting that's going to be necessary for you to go out and be successful when you're back in your states, when you're running your programs, what's actually going on in Washington and how that is impacting and will impact what you're doing. Now, when I was RNC chairman, I learned a few things, and I want to share with you the first lesson, which I think is going to be an important lesson. Matt has probably heard me share this lesson before, but I don't know if he's taken it to heart yet, but it is an important one. And just keep it in mind as you have that next encounter and that next conversation in which you realize, this is the lesson learned. And the lesson is this: you can't please everyone, but you can certainly piss them all off at the same time. And I learned that probably in the first week on the job. And the question for you is, are you, in whatever capacity, whatever role you play right now, are you prepared to tick some people off to get the job done right? Are you prepared to push back against the status quo and the accepted norms that have proven themselves to be at best ineffective and at worst just bad public policy? A lot of times folks come to these conferences and they sit in these chairs and they have a great conversation with their neighbor and they eat some great meals and they may or may not have too much to drink. Okay, that's cool. But what's your takeaway? Why are you really here? To be bombarded with a lot of statistics and a lot of noise, or to actually think through how you go back and solve a problem? And in the process of solving that problem, you're going to have to make some people mad. And the question is, are you prepared to do that? Because look at what you do. Look at who you touch every single day. Now, I know pharma, big corporations, all these layers, but at the end of the day, who's the ultimate person being served? And so the question for a lot of us, not just in the area of Medicare and Medicaid, healthcare writ large, any form of public policy, the economy, whatever, is, are we willing to accept what we see happening right now? Ed has already laid out just very top line some of the challenges that you are dealing with. Programs that were supposed to be online that aren't online, so how do you do your job if it's not there? And, oh, then we're layering in healthcare on top of all of that, and that's supposed to work, but then this may or may not, there's exchange. You've got to work through all of this stuff. You've got to figure this out. And so the question is, how uncomfortable are you prepared to make others so that you can get it right? When I grew up in Washington, D.C., and as growing up, I used to look at Capitol Hill, because I grew up in the Petworth area, so I wasn't that far. And the Capitol was kind of my backyard. And so as I was saying a little bit earlier, I would go and hang out with my buddies. We'd sit on the Capitol steps. We'd have a bottle of Coke and, some popcorn and chips or whatever. And just, 11 o'clock at night, just kind of chilling. Police would walk by. Hey, how's it going? Very different environment, very different climate back in the day. But I always felt, even in those moments, that I was living in the real world, and the people who worked inside that building were in some other world. And I just didn't understand how they thought. And I have to tell you the truth. All these years later, as I watch our elected leadership deal with very serious issues, those issues that you face, I face, our nation faces as a whole, whether it's on fiscal policy, healthcare policy, foreign policy, national security, I still don't think they have a clue. So as we convulse from one scandal to the next, as we struggle with an economy that refuses to really get started, and now the potential for another military engagement in the Middle East, coupled with the inability of our elected officials to actually get something done, what must the White House, what must the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, what must the Democrat-controlled Senate do to show us and prove to us that they get it, that they understand the stakes for all of us? Well, the first thing that they can do is respect where the money comes from. That's us. Secondly, they can make the tough choices now, not down the road. We've already seen this played out for the last 3-4 years, whether you're talking about debt ceiling, let's push it off to the last minute. Sequestration, that was a great idea when we passed the law. Now it's time to actually do it. Oh my God, no. So we've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. We know the phony drama by now. But the impact of poor policymaking, the impact of poor regulation implementation has profound effects on what you do and how you do your job, how you serve others, how all of us grow an economy, provide for those who need help, and make this place a better place tomorrow than we find it today. And of course, lastly, just stop playing the political games. Now, when you're in a very partisan position as I was as national chairman, you can sit there and you throw the darts, and I loved the idea of firing Pelosi and going after Harry Reid. And that was part of what the political arm should do. But what we've seen happen now is the political arm become the arm for the legislative and the executive branches. And they get caught up in this idea that everything is political. And it isn't. It isn't. There are big issues out there that need to be solved. But let's not forget that we, the people, we also have a little growing up to do when it comes to solving our fiscal problems, our health problems, and pushing the weak-minded politicians to do the right thing. Too often we send conflicting signals to policymakers. On the one hand, we demand that they shut down programs, stop spending, and cut taxes. But then on the other, we admonish them to save my favorite program. Spend more on filling my favorite special interest here. It's okay to raise taxes on them as long as it's not us. And so when we send those conflicting messages, the policymakers, they respond in a very conflicting way. Moreover, when leaders take steps to make the hard fiscal choices and take the responsible steps to rein in government spending, we immediately play the zero-sum game of you can't be a responsible steward of the people's money and meet the basic needs of those most in need. And that's just baloney. We make guns and butter decisions every day. We make that balancing act work. We recognize in our own personal economies, in our own communities, and certainly as a country, that there are times when you can't have it all, but there are times when you can have some of each. So it becomes a matter of priorities. What are our priorities as a nation? You know what your priorities are and what you do. And you try every day to find ways to execute those priorities. The same is true on a larger scale. And yet we in some way have given up on actually finding the balance between our priorities and recognizing how important it is for us at the end of the day to be about service. I remember standing on the steps of our state capitol when I was elected lieutenant governor in 2002, and in January of 2003, and taking the oath of office. I'm standing there, and it's just an overwhelming moment, having been elected the first Republican lieutenant governor in the state's 360-year history, the first African American to be elected statewide, and to appreciate in that time, standing there, that just behind me, behind the Annapolis State Capitol building, at the dock of Annapolis, Kunta Kinte was brought to this country and sold into slavery. And in that moment, I realized that I'm not the Republican lieutenant governor. I am the lieutenant governor. And my oath of office is sworn not just to take care of all my Republican friends, but even take care of some of those nasty, filthy Democrats that I have to deal with. I say that with affection. But the point was and remains that it was in that moment I realized that it's about service. And what has happened, I think, to the culture that you're caught up in as you do your jobs is a culture that has forgotten that it's about service. So part of what I wanted to charge you with this morning as you begin this conference and as you begin this time together is to think about that. Think about what you do in the context of service provided. Service given. Now, I don't know the nuances and the technicalities of all of what the folks in this room do, where you are on the food chain, how important you are or how important you think you are. I don't know any of that. But what I do know is that I'm looking at a room full of people who are taking the time, as Ed noted earlier, as did Matthew, of committing yourselves to this time together to learn, to go back and do something good, to implement a process, a program, to work with your partners, the federal level, the state level, the private sector. You're at the apex of service. And understand and appreciate just how important that is as you go about doing what you do on a day-to-day basis. I know it's not hard. I know it's hard. I know it's not easy. I know it's difficult at times to deal with bureaucracies and policies that don't make sense. But the strength of what you bring to the table in intelligence and perseverance and fortitude and all those attributes, it's not just about bureaucracy. It's not just about being in a cubicle and going through the checklist of process. You bring real value, real commitment to the mundane, to the ordinary. and you find ways to make it extraordinary, believe it or not, just stop and think about that in the context of what it is you do. Because otherwise you wouldn't do it, right? I mean, when you stop and think about the poor that are served in this country or oftentimes not served, how many of you got up this morning, looked in the mirror, and said, all I want to be today is poor? I don't see any hands. So why does our country and why do those of us who serve the poor think that that's their aspiration too? What you bring, even if you are far removed from the end user, from the recipient of a Medicaid service or program, a Medicare service or program, a health care program, has an impact, has value to someone. And if you begin to appreciate what you do in that context, it takes on a different light. It's like standing on the state capitol steps and realizing, gee, it's not just about me and the process and how I got here and what it all means and being the first at this and being great at that. It really is about what am I going to do with what I'm being handed? And how do I make this work every day? How do I deal with the boss who just doesn't get what we're all seeing and what we all know? How do I get partners who want to keep doing it the same old way to understand that the economy's changed, people are changing, the value that people expect on the return of investing in you matters. So how uncomfortable are you prepared to be in doing what you do? We all know the statistics. We all know the costs. We all know that our budgets are out of control. We know that the spending requirements, the onslaught of Obamacare, the health care regime that's coming into place, we know all of that. So now the question and the challenges that we all face is how do we make this work? As Ed noted, you're already looking at statistics that are showing some 13 million people are still going to be without insurance. That's going to have a real impact still on what you do and how you do it. So you're going to have to adapt to creating this new environment, this new culture, while you're still going to be dealing with some of the same old, same old. And you're going to have to find that bridge. You're going to have to find a way to create that bridge in what it is you do and how you do it. I know in terms of what we try to do from a political standpoint, there are a lot of us, believe it or not, who believe that there is a new order that needs to come to the table. There has to be a new way to capture this new environment. Case in point, we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the differences and the challenges that are coming up when we were in the back of the room before the program started. And I made reference to this next generation and how they solve problems. The millennials. And you're seeing a generation that's beginning to come online, and I see a few millennials here in the room. All right? A new generation that's coming online that doesn't look at a silo and go, okay, I can work with that. What they do is they deconstruct, they tear down, they break it apart. I don't know how many of you saw Iron Man 3, right? Great scene in Iron Man 3, right? When, he goes up to the computer and he's trying to figure out a problem and figure out what he needs to do next. And he takes information and he throws it up on a screen. And he starts pulling. Right? No silo. Random bits of information that pulls together to try to figure out how to solve a problem. Well, that's what we're seeing in this next generation that's coming up. Their question isn't, how do we solve this problem? Their question is there an app for that? And if there isn't, then they create one to solve the problem. We want to feed the poor, we create the app to get the resource directly to the people who need it. That's the future. So how is what you're doing going to fit into that future? Who are the innovators in this room? Who are those who are prepared to create something that's a little bit outside the box? You talk about these programs, the authoritative MDRP event for everything government pricing, rebates, and regulation. That sounds really interesting. But how do you make it real in this new environment that you are now embarking on? That's your challenge. That's what you're going to have to deal with. These conferences take on a very different light when you look at them through that lens. It's not just about coming here and getting droned in on all the other stuff that you already know and all the information, the statistics from here to there. That's all very important. But while you're hearing that, you now have to take all of that information, throw it up on the screen as it's being thrown up on the screen for you, and ask yourselves, is there an app for that? Because that's where you're going to begin in this new environment. You don't get to like or not like the Affordable Care Act. You don't get to like or not like the Medicaid laws. You don't get to make those policy choices. You have to work with them, execute on them, implement them, struggle through them. So why not be creative? Why not look at the ultimate end user and figure out through the partners you work with how to make this system work? One of the things I also learned very quickly, aside from ticking off a lot of people at the RNC, because I wanted to come in and innovate and be different, I remember talking about hip-hop Republicans. Oh, God, that scared the life out of a lot of folks. Because everyone thought I meant Mitch McConnell would walk with his pants down around his behind, put on some big bling, and, sing a Snoop Dogg song or something. I don't know what that was all about, but what I was talking about is making what we did relevant in the time we're doing it. And what we've seen is, from a political side, the parties acting somewhat irrelevantly. Certainly, I can say that on my side of the fence. Not connected to what people are saying. So as we look at the increases in budgets, we look at the cost of these programs growing, we look at the concern that we have, for example, the price tag on something like Medicaid growing, astronomically from $250 billion to $554 billion, these big numbers. The question that you have to answer over your time here, and certainly when you leave here, is how do we make this work better? How do we make this work more effectively? Even if the program doesn't come online in January, you still got to do the job today. You still have to be innovative today. You still have to be creative today. You cannot put that off because there is no sanctioned program that's been blessed by the United States Congress or some regulator sitting in a back hole somewhere in Washington. You still have to do your job. So how are you going to do it? If you let yourselves be locked in and hamstrung to a system that refuses to be innovative. I remember having a conversation with Governor Ehrlich. Governor Ehrlich was of Maryland at the time. We were our team, and we were talking about the fact that when we came in, we had a $2 billion shortfall. We had payments that had to be made on behalf of our citizens through the Medicare and Medicaid programs that hadn't been paid, people who had not received their benefits. We had to figure out how to do that. So we had to get a little bit innovative. Congress wasn't writing us a check anytime soon. So we had to prioritize. We had to invert, convert, revert, move stuff around to be creative in order to provide that service to the least among us, because their needs mattered most in that hour. It was a matter of priorities. And that's what you're asked to do in many ways. Find those priorities, set those priorities, and execute the job. So we're looking for political leadership that's going to commit to proposing common sense strategies that make all of our lives easier. Don't hold your breath on that. The mood and environment in Washington is not built for that right now. The innovation, the creativity, the push is coming from outside of Washington, is coming from around the country. Whether it's Tea Party, whether it's Occupy Wall Street, whether it's town hall meetings, there are voices that are beginning to set a new tone and a new conversation. We see even right now the President of the United States struggling with a national security situation. And where is the force and energy coming from? Is it John McCain? No. Is it Joe Biden? No. Is it John Kerry? No. It's you. It's people who've made it very clear, no, we're not feeling this. The power we still have is inordinate. It's an amazing amount of power that we see to others. It's time to pull some of that back in what we do as professionals and what we do as citizens, if we really want to get the job done. So my final thought for you is this. The responsibility of those we elect to lead in times like these is to be an honest broker on our behalf. They must be fearless in enacting policies that encourage greater economic development, growth, job creation, providing for the least among us. They must be visionary in efforts to foster a climate that promotes security, while at the same time respecting individual rights and liberties. What we do, what you do, over the next several months will define the rest of this century in so many important ways. And the decisions that we make, however big, however small, however unimportant they may seem in this hour, will be a very important strategic link in either solving problems or making them worse. That's it. It's about as uncomplicated as it will get. What we have to help others recognize is the old rules no longer apply. And trust me, that's a good thing for our kids. Thank you very much.